and Jill are a boy and a girl, and they live in your hometown.
Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, or perhaps it's good evening where you are when you're listening. My name is Barry Greenfield, and welcome to my inaugural podcast. The music you just listened to was a track from my 1973 RCA album, Blue Sky, which I have since retitled The Early Years. And I did that because I combined my 1973 LP that I recorded in Hollywood with my 1974 LP, Sanctuary, that I recorded at Mushroom Studios in Vancouver with the finest musicians in Vancouver of 1974. And they're quite interesting statements on the music of the time, mostly because the musicianship is stellar throughout, and the songwriting of a younger man who's seen the world through the turbulent times of the 60s and the early 70s comes through in the lyric on both LPs, which are now one LP, The Early Years. Anyway, back to the focus at hand, which is the podcast. It's August 2023, and the reason I'm doing this is because I got prompted to from so many that love me. And they wanted me to embark on a new adventure in what has become a never-ending journey, a musical journey that began in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, when I got my first guitar at 15. I'm now 72, so I guess it's been 52 years of living with a guitar in my lap and creating songs. This has led to many connections, cross paths, adventures with household names, I suppose, people that changed my life, helped me with my musical journey, and taught me so much, all mentors, one and all. My intention is to share these Barry Tales with you via the audio of this microphone, that laptop, and this podcast. I'll share my stories, I'll try to give my insight, and I'll disclose all the intimate details about a few special days when the stars aligned and I spent time with a world-class musician, a famous artist, or a music business guru that all affected my walk. Over the last 5 decades, spending time inside the music industry, I've met tons of these world-class musicians. Mike Nesmith, John Lee Hooker, Supertramp, John Lennon, Kenny Rogers, Sheryl Crow, Bobby Gentry, just to name a few. And they'll all be visited individually through these podcasts. Each one a blessing, each one fun. Never a bad experience. I will explore the effect and the effect of my rubbing shoulders with genius. In life, if you move the rudder an inch, you will end up somewhere else. And each Barry tale will illustrate how a meeting with a major talent shaped my music, my songwriting, and in some cases, even my life. I don't think I'm exaggerating. It was a life-changing time for me discussing music with a man like Kenny Rogers. Many don't know, but Kenny Rogers was there at the birth of the Eagles. He produced their first work when Glenn Frey and Don Henley started working together. Kenny Rogers was a major music giant, absolutely. So yes, the rudder did move. And now, as I said, at 72, the ripe old age of 72, it is time to look back and to reflect and maybe to share. So here we go. Strap yourselves in for a story that meant a lot to me. It was the day I hung out with Harry Nilsson, and the day ended with the arrival of Ringo Starr. So the year was 1973. I was 22. The place, RCA Studios in Hollywood, and I was recording the LP that you heard at the beginning of this podcast, the early years, and I was using the same room as Elvis Presley. The room he used, Studio B, when he recorded at RCA. I was standing in the same spot where the King stood. I know this because I asked the engineer, Rick Ruggieri, where Elvis stood. He came in the room and he pointed his finger to a spot, and I had all the microphones adjusted to that spot. Rick Ruggieri was one of the first geniuses that I met in this walk. He had a great gift of massaging and helping a young, naive, inexperienced Canadian kid learn the ropes. And he came up through the ranks at RCA. So he was a company man, but with a heart of gold. Inside this state-of-the-art studio called Studio B, I soon began to feel at home. We were deep into week 3 of the recording of the early years, and I knew that the LA band would rock every day, and they had become my close friends. These guys were the best money could hire in LA. And I say guys because they all were male, because I guess that's the world we lived in 1973, and we accepted it. They all were supportive, and they all enjoyed my songwriting, and they all knew that I was the new kid in town. I was naive, inexperienced, but yes, I was a sponge for knowledge, and I think they knew that too, because they took the time to explain and to guide. The leader of the group was a very, very, very kind, big-hearted man by the name of Larry Carlson. He arrived every day with a small caravan filled with guitars, banjos, mandolins, acoustic, electric, big and small. He played electric guitar on my record, some of the acoustic guitars, as did Dean Parks, and I played some of the acoustic guitars. He went on to be the guitarist in Steely Dan, Paul McCartney's band, and his jazz band, the Crusaders, considered one of the great guitar players of our day. The other members of the band were Joe Osborne playing bass. He was a member of the famous Wrecking Crew. He also played on Paul Simon's work, Simon and Garfunkel's work, of course, in the 60s, and he's the famous bass player from Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, 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 when the Byrds recorded with the Wrecking Crew in the room. On drums, I had Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was, I believe, 6'8", I might be exaggerating, but he was really tall. He was the drummer from Derek and the Dominoes, excuse me, and the dude who wrote the long piano tag that we hear whenever we sit through the entire Layla song. Keyboards was Larry Mahobrak, best known for being Frank Sinatra's pianist. What a talent he was, and also beyond special. But the real keys to my success and the longevity that early years has had was the arranger Jimmy Haskell. His credits include the Everly Brothers, Elvis, Neil Diamond, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and later Billy Joel. I spent 3 days living in his house, sleeping in the spare room, working with him on the 10 songs for the early years, and together we arranged them, rewrote them a bit, and sharpened them. And Jimmy Haskell was #1 in the world, and certainly #1 in my heart when it comes to Blue Sky. The other key to this record was the producer, a man called David M. Kirschenbaum. Now, David's career went on to cover 5 decades, where he earned 75 international gold and platinum albums, multiple Grammys, and an Oscar nomination for the work he did with Bryan Adams in Everything I Do It For You, for the Robin Hood film. The small, tight band of 5 or 6 players, depending on the day, Jimmy Haskell conducting them and conducting me, and the suggestions that came nonstop, fluently from Kirschenbaum, made this one of the most exciting experiences of my life. I've always loved the studio. I I get excited just thinking about it. And the reason that is because that 3-4 weeks in Los Angeles in 1973 set the tone for professionalism, for arriving on time, for being in tune, and for knowing your parts. I stayed up for hours in the Holiday Inn in Hollywood practicing my parts, practicing my guitar. Because when you play guitar and the guy playing bass is from the Wrecking Crew, you kind of want to do it right. I tried my best. Wasn't always perfect. One afternoon, a little small story, Jim Gordon, the drummer from Derek and the Dominoes, pointed to the Rolex on his left hand. He smiled wryly and said, "Layla bought me this." Yeah, that was a moment. I was in heaven, 12 plus, maybe 14, maybe 15 hours a day. But actually, I was in recording school. So here we are, the day I met Harry Nilsson. It was the third Thursday I had been in the studio, so it was our third week. It was early in the morning. I usually arrived about 9:30, 10 a.m., and I walked into RCA. I flew past the security, who by now knew I was Barry, the guy who was always happy and always excited to be there. And I flew up the spiral staircase to be greeted by a baker's dozen, 15 posters, all handwritten, large, really large, some a yard by a yard, that had the same thing written on them. "Welcome, Ringo. Happy to see you, Ringo." Oh, there's the phone. I'm just going to get that. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, that was Laurie, and she's heading back from her sister's, so I'll get back to work here. I rushed into Studio B, which was my studio, the smaller one, and I asked David, "What's going on? What's going on? Why the posters?" He was as excited as me, and he was as starstruck as me, because early days for us both. He told me that Harry Nilsson was working in Studio A and that Ringo Starr was planning a visit that afternoon. And the staff decided to put up posters to welcome the Beatle. Wow, Harry Nilsson. I loved everything he did. His writing, his vocals, his ideas. He was original. He was one of a kind. John Lennon, in fact, called Harry his favorite American artist, and I can't disagree with that. I've always thought Harry Nilsson was special. Without You, as time goes by, Coconut, Everybody's Talking, Jump Into the Fire, Spaceman, Nilsson Smilsson, Little Schmilsson in the Night. The list never ends. They're all worth their weight in gold. There's no weakness in them. They're brilliant. The production was wonderful. He did superb vocals. As I said, he was unique and he was fresh. Harry had it all. A real musical hero to me. So anyway, I was distracted by the news that Harry Nilsson was down the hall, but we began the day's work, which is what we had to do. That's why we were there. And today we were adding an accordion part to be played by Larry Mahobrak, Sinatra's guy, on a song called Jack and Jill. And of course, that's why I began the podcast with Jack and Jill, so you could hear the accordion. And that's what we did that day. But came to 11:30 or noon, and nature called. So I walked down the RCA main hall, turned left to where the men's loo was, and I walked in. Harry Nilsson is in that room with a little white bag full of powder sitting next to the sink, and in his hand was a spoon. Now, I'm a shy guy, and I froze a little because it was Harry. In his right hand was, I mentioned, a small silver spoon, and in his left, he'd picked up the bag with the powder in it from the sink. Now, that really freaked me out. I'd never been around those kind of drugs, and I knew what they were because I've seen movies, but I'd never been in the room with any. He smiled at me. "Hello." I replied, "Hello." He said, "I'm Harry. Who are you? Would you like some?" And he held out a full spoon of the powder. No thanks. My name is Barry Greenfield, and I'm working in Studio B. I stuttered. Yes, I stuttered, because I was with Harry Nilsson. Anyway, we chatted for about 10 minutes, and things got much more relaxed and soon became normal. and we shared time getting to know each other in that spacious RCA men's washroom. What a strange place to be with another musician talking about things such as songwriting. We talked about the Beatles, their songs that we liked. Norwegian Wood, I remember he spoke very well about. We talked about the problems with corporate RCA and how business-like they were and how unmusic-like they were. And I told Harry about a song I was writing called The Music Business. And the lyric was, I remember now, it was, don't forget it's the music business. And don't forget where the emphasis is. It used to be the music, but now it's completely on the business. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was written in 1972, 73. And the music business has evolved to what it is today. Auto-tune, hair is more important than lyrics, and artificial intelligence is now doing things that the Beach Boys spent days doing. Don't forget it's the music business, and don't forget where the emphasis is. It used to be the music, but now it's completely on the business. Anyway, this guy looked like Harry. He sounded like Harry. He was kind. He was friendly. He was open. And he was very, very normal. So I quickly relaxed and became Barry. Things concluded with Harry saying, if you have time, come into A and listen to my track. He was gone. So I ran back into B to share my excitement and my story with David and the boys in the band. And I said, what should I do? I asked Kirschenbaum. I turned to Larry Cotton. What should I do? What should I do, Larry? Now, maybe Harry Nilsson was just being nice. I mean, maybe he didn't really mean it. I mean, you know, I was terrified to walk into A. I was terrified to walk into A. But David Kirschenbaum sat there. I remember he never got up, but he barely missed a beat. Barry, you must go. You will learn a lot. And we can handle the accordion part. We know what you want. We've discussed it for days. And then we'll do some other cleaning up until you get back. Opportunities like this come up for a reason. Don't ignore this chance. Go, 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 David Kirschenbaum said with love in his heart. Well, you know, David Kirschenbaum went on to win all those awards and work with Bob Dylan and work with Cat Stevens. And every time I hear Fast Cars by Tracy Chapman, I understand David's role in that song. He was a minimalist. But like all winners and all people that succeed in whatever field they're in, they take a chance, and then something comes up, they use that opportunity as a positive sign, and they don't ignore it or say, you know, I'm not going to believe it. David told me to go, and Larry Cotton told me to go, and so I just got up, walked down the hall, and I found myself knocking on the door of Studio A, much like you would knock on the neighbor's front door. I then walked in, and I heard Harry say, hey, Barry, thanks for popping by. Big smile on his face. He invited me to sit in the large leather mixed chair to his left. Now, there's only two large chairs in the room. Harry was in the middle one, and I was to his left. The engineer was in the smaller chair to the right of Harry, and I suppose he was in a smaller chair because he rolled more and moved, because it was a very, very large board in Studio B, many, many yards in length and width. Anyway, the next 3 hours we spent working on a Harry track, the Moonbeam song. Now, this was a song from the 1974 LP of Harry called Son of Dracula, and it was all a part of a soundtrack for a British musical film that he made starring himself and Ringo. I later found out it was released in 1974 on Apple Films, but I never saw it or heard about it ever again, and I guess Harry wasn't meant to be a movie star. He was meant to do what he was born to do, which is sing, write songs, and make records. Now, Harry allowed me to use the mixing board. I had hands-on touch. I learned about how he used the gain, the EQ, the auxiliary sends, the pan, how to massage the reverb pet levels, the reverb levels on the song. I can't even say that. The reverb levels on the song, and how to ride the faders slowly, slowly, he would say. To this day, I ride the faders slowly because Harry taught me to. I learned so much from Harry and his engineer. 3 hours, all classroom. He actually found my insight relevant, and he took many of my suggestions, and it made him happy, I think, to have another songwriter in the room. I think he related. He was extremely professional, but light and fun. As I say, 3 hours full of classroom. Then at about 2:30, the doors swung open, and everything changed. Everything. The air in Studio A was about to thicken. The heat was about to take over. The magic of the day was about to dissolve quickly. Ringo Starr walked in. He arrived with Richard Perry, who was Harry and Ringo's record producer back in the day, and as they walked into A, they hugged each other, and I sat down, leaving the big leather chair to a chair in the rear of the room. Now, Beatles, I hear and I read, have a different energy than many. I'm sure that Prince Charles has that energy, and I'm sure that the lady from Notting Hill, I can never remember her name, Julia Roberts, has that energy, and I'm sure that even Donald Trump has that energy. When they walk in a room, they're intimidating because of their size. Ringo had a very unique vibe, a very special presence, and I sort of became invisible. I just sort of melded into the chair and became quiet and small. Ringo held an open bottle of Jack Daniels in his left hand. It was half empty, it was half full. Was he drunk? Probably. He passed it to Harry, who took a chug. Then he passed it to Richard Perry. He chugged too, but no one offered me a chug. I wouldn't have taken it, but no one said, "Barry, would you like a chug?" Funny word, that, chug. It was early in the afternoon. Anyway, they laughed and chatted about the confusion. They had parking in the RCA parking lot. Then Harry offered Ringo and Richard some of his powder. They both filled the spoon twice, once for each nostril, and Harry took extra hits too. Man, I was in the twilight zone. I was frozen. I hear from others who know such things that is what happens whenever a Beatle enters any room. I know this from reading books regarding Eric Clapton and his shared time with George Harrison. Eric once said that in the late 60s, as he was becoming a really big deal in London, I mean, they actually called him Small G God on walls. Clapton is God, they wrote. So whenever he went somewhere, he felt adored, he felt loved, and he felt important. But, he writes, when he went places with his good friend George Harrison, anywhere, every time, he too felt small because another Beatle was in the room. He said he became insignificant because George consumed the oxygen in the room. Eric's experience was parallel to mine in Studio A. Weird. I had the same feeling as Eric Clapton. Then Harry turned to me and said, "Richard Starkey, this is Barry Greenberg. Yes, he got my name wrong, and he called Ringo Starr Richard Starkey. Never forget that." He repeated the same intro with Richard Perry. Got my name wrong again. He thought I was Barry Greenberg. We shook hands like two lawyers might at a luncheon in Piccadilly. I shook Ringo's hand and I shook Richard Perry's hand. They smiled, and then I sat back down in the chair in the back of the room. And the air in the room, as I said, was hazy, heavy. But their voices were clear, and all three were casual and engaged. It was Barry who had altered. Barry Greenberg, I guess. I suddenly was irrelevant and insignificant, or so it seemed to me. After a short interval, perhaps 5 minutes, I knew it was time to leave. I was now redundant. Maybe Harry felt protective of Ringo. I am sensitive to my surroundings, and I instinctively knew that I should vacate and leave. Quietly, I stood up, said, "Bye, heading out." I thanked Harry, but I don't think he heard me. They were busy swigging Jack and snorting powder. They were in their own world, a private world. It was time for Barry Greenberg to go back to work. But as I look back now, 50 years later, and think about it as I prepared for this podcast, I can still see it all. I can still recall it clearly. Visually, I can see it. I can see what Ringo was wearing. Sports jacket, tie, not done to the top. He was short. He was Ringo. His voice was Liverpudlian, and he smiled a lot. He looked like the guy from A Hard Day's Night. He ruled time and space as I hovered on my personal cloud, eavesdropping. I was listening to them chat. I began to accept things. This was a blissful moment. This was no reason to freeze. This was a reason to relax. Enjoy my brief encounter with the Beatle. I'd already gained so much from the hours with Harry. It was a very special circumstance, I thought, and I felt that I'd been divinely gifted. Yeah, I smiled inside. It was wonderful hearing them exchange small talk about stuff I knew nothing about. Personal moments from them. Harry, Richard, and Ringo were good friends. I mean, they obviously filmed this film together, made records together. They were mates. Everything suddenly grew normal as I was leaving. For them, it was me who was affected. These three were not unusual at all. Perhaps I got an understanding that day about being around the famous. The famous don't feel famous unless you're awkward. Then they know they're famous. They want to chat and talk about normal shit. That's what they want. I think. I know. Yes, I do. I went back to my safe place, my home in Studio B. The boys were still working on overdubs for Jack and Jill and cleaning up the tracks where you breathe too loud or you cough or some embellishment they want to change. I loved working on Jack and Jill. I love that song. I've always loved that song. I've not played it live for decades, but my intent is to sing it on my next concert in November at the Roundhouse, November the 17th. And I'm hoping I can deliver it with the sincerity in which it was recorded in LA that week in 1973. My music always brings me solace, always will, always have, always has, and will continue. What an amazing day it was. In 1994, Harry Nilsson died of a heart attack. He was in the midst of recording what became his last album, Lost and Found. The craft of Nilsson's music, songs, singing, and production, and his defined attitude will remain touchstones for many. For me, for sure. I still play Harry a lot. Ringo, well, he rocks on. He's 83 now, and he's still creating music, just like me, making new songs. Because I guess just like Barry Greenberg, he loves music too. I went back to the Holiday Inn in Hollywood, a famous building where probably thousands of rock stars have spent the night. And I lay in bed thinking about that miraculous Thursday, thinking about Jack and Jill, thinking about Harry Nilsson, my brief encounter with Ringo. As I said, it's a day I can still recall with great clarity, 50 years down the road. I'm not really reading this, I'm just using it as a guide. I'm kind of just talking to you. I'm sure my podcast will grow, but this is the first one, and I don't want to do it over and over and over. I've listened to other people's podcasts, and I wanted to make this one shorter than it is, but I want to share the whole story with you. I want to do further podcasts, my meetings with Sonny and Cher, or my musical exchanges with Kenny Rogers, or the day I went to Apple Records and was offered a recording contract. I will do the same. I'll give you the details, the smells, the colors, the feelings. You know, I've become much smarter because of Harry Nilsson. He became a mentor, a teacher, and I suppose a fleeting friend. He really understood music and the recording process. He was a giant of a talent, and he was wonderful to me in 1973 in Los Angeles at RCA. I loved every second in Studio A with Harry Nilsson, and I became aware that Ringo was unique to all. Yep, so that's the day I met Harry Nilsson, and I wouldn't change a single second of it, my friends. Thank you, Harry, for the invite. Thank you, Harry, for the lessons. And maybe I can impart the key lesson in this day as I learned it. If a door opens, walk through it. Live your life fully. Take advantage of opportunity. And you never know what you'll learn or how you'll change if you move the rudder just a small couple of degrees, because I guarantee you, you'll end up in a different harbor. Okay, podcast 1, the day I hung with Harry Nilsson, is over, and I'll begin thinking about the second podcast, which I will do in a few weeks. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your valuable time. If you want to get in touch with me, please do. I'd love your feedback, your suggestions, and if you want to talk music, be it mine or anybody's, let me know. My email address is Barry Greenfield, lowercase, one word, at shaw, shaw.ca. All right. Cheers. Good morning. Good afternoon. Or maybe it's good evening. Bye-bye.